Hey, what's happening? I'm Claudio, and today I'm developing an idea for my miter saw dust collection. Miter saw is one of the worst offenders for creating dust and spreading it around the shop, and if you're not wearing a respirator, into your lungs. Boo. I've been kicking around a couple ideas lately and decided I would give it a shot. If you want to see what I did, stick around. Let's make it now.
Even though I wasn't sure how the dust collection would work, I designed the project in SketchUp just to start somewhere. I brought some 3/4 inch plywood I had to the table saw. It was mostly cutting a few larger pieces down to roughly 26 inches and then ripping smaller sections off of those. I needed to make a couple 30-degree angled cuts. Since my table saw only goes down to 45 degrees, I had to cut the boards vertically. Doing this means taking the opposite angle from 90, which would be 60. So I used the angle gauge to dial my blade into exactly 60 degrees. A normal table saw fence isn't tall enough to stabilize a tall piece of wood going through the saw. I had to build a jig to help. My plan was to nest 2 smaller boards over the existing fence. After bringing the blade back to a perfect 90, I marked and cut the 2 smaller sides of the plywood that would fit over the fence. I applied some wood glue to the 2 faces, and when they were snugly in place, tacked them with brad nails. The fence fit great and I could now cut my angles. I pushed the boards through the blade while keeping them firmly against the new fence. The cuts turned out great. Now I could work on the base. I had to make a hole in the center to receive my dust collection port. Using a compass, I drew out a 4-inch circle. I brought the base over to the bench and used a drill for some relief cuts and then the jigsaw to cut out the hole. I used a drum sander on my drill press to even out the hole and then rounded the edges with the trim router. To attach the back, I marked its position on the base and then drilled and countersunk some holes. I added some glue and then screwed it in place. I also pre-drilled the holes on the back so the plywood wouldn't split. I applied glue to the boards that I had cut a 30-degree edge on. I put them in place and then tacked in some brad nails. I went back to the table saw and cut the 2 side end pieces. These are what hold the pegboard. I glued and nailed them both in place. Now that I had the final dimensions, I could cut the pegboard to the correct size. It slid in perfectly. To give the miter saw a little more room, I bowed the pegboard back using some rounded supports on the top and base. I rough cut them with the jigsaw, smoothed them on the disc sander, and cut them to size on the table saw. I could now glue and nail them in place. I set the base where it would eventually sit and traced out the hole to cut through the bench. I then cut out the hole using an oscillating saw. Unfortunately, one of the bench supports was in the way. After relocating the support, I connected the dust collection hose to the flange. It was time to seal up the unit. I wanted the entire force of the suction to come through the pegboard holes and not through leaks in the box. I used some caulking to go over all the edges and corners. After attaching the top with some glue and nails, I caulked those edges as well. This is what the suction box looked like before I started experimenting. Before screwing down the box, I sealed the joint to the dust collection flange using the same caulking. For my first test, I swept up some sawdust and threw it over the box with the suction turned on. The standard pegboard holes clogged right away. I grabbed a drill and widened most of the holes. I had no idea what effect this would have on suction. I sanded the board smooth and tested again. I also used a countersink bit to widen the front of the holes. A lot of small chips were bouncing off the sides, so I decided to add some small walls. I cut them out of 1/4 inch plywood and just tacked them in place. After about an hour of testing and modifying, this is what I came up with. I realized I didn't need suction from all the holes, just some in specific locations. I used blue tape to cover up holes I didn't want to use. I repeated 5 cuts through a 2x4 with the suction turned off. There was a cloud of dust, and this is the debris that was left. This consists of both fine and heavy particles. I ran the same 5 cuts, this time with the suction turned on. There was still some debris on the base, but only the heavy particles and a lot less than before.
I love projects like this because you never know how they're going to turn out until you actually make them. I definitely don't see this as a finished product, just a prototype. I discovered that I didn't need to use all the pegboard holes, and the overall height of the box can also be much lower. At some point, I may also add a couple more suction ports coming up through the bench on either side to catch some of those heavier particles that bounce around. As is, I ran some slow motion footage to get a better sense of what the dust particles were doing. This is with the dust collection turned on. There are particles bouncing around, but all the fine dust gets sucked right in. This is with the dust collection turned off. This time, there's a huge cloud of dust as well as particles flying all over the place. I'm really happy with how the suction box is performing. I'll keep using it for a while to see what other improvements I can come up with. Eventually, I'll build a better performing version 2. If you like this project, please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you won't miss any of my future videos. You can follow me on social media at Make It Now channel and check out my website at www.makeitnow.tv. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.